Welcome, everybody. I'm here with Danny. She waved. It won't show you unless you unmute, Danny, but she did wave hi. So welcome.
So sorry, someone was talking to me trying to get the login, so I was just sending it to him.
No worries.
Hi.
Thank you. Thank you for helping out with that. I appreciate it. We did hear from, well, I've heard from Colleen pretty much every day, but she started her master class on Mount Karama. And she did send a meditation. We won't do that today. Danny and I kind of have to look at that a little bit closer. But hopefully we will be able to share that at some point she's sent that from the mountain. So that's really cool. We have made long announcements, so we'll just make a quick announcements. We do have our free webinar coming up on November 18th. That is all about Reiki, shamanism, journeying, and how to journey, introduction to journey techniques. We have animal Reiki coming up this month. We have human Reiki coming up in December. We do have our gratitude ceremony this month on November 25th, or it's almost this month, it's in a few days. And then registration for Next Step Reiki also opens on November 18th. It will open up with that webinar. You can register for the webinar and you will get the recording, even if you can't attend live or attend for the whole thing. But Next Step Reiki registration also opens up on November 18th and it closes on January 18th. So we'll talk more about that as it continues to get closer. Also, we did just release a full podcast on Monday. So Monday, the 27th. If you're curious about that course, there are year-long courses. If you're curious about that, you can go and listen to that. And there's a lot more details on it, as well as some other things. There's lots of information that we share in there. It's not just about the details of the course. We share a lot about our experiences and stories and things like that that are also a part of that episode. So I think I'll keep I'll keep those the announcements short this week because I think last week they were quite long. All right, so we continue our subject of spiritual topics. I know I've been saying spiritual buzzwords. They're not exactly buzzwords as like how we like to think about them. They are topics that we explore. They're topics that we teach about. They're topics that we do in our own personal sessions. This week is going to be about past lives and ancestral history. So those are the topics that you might have heard about. If you're new to Reiki, you might hear all of these words and wonder what they mean. If you're not new to Reiki, you might hear these topics and wonder what they mean, or you might also be familiar with them or trained in them. It's always good to hear different viewpoints or different versions of these because there are a lot of techniques, there are a lot of ways to do all of this work in the spiritual communities. So there's lots of trainings out there. The one thing to know is that Reiki and Reiki techniques certainly can do this work. It can combine with other techniques that you might have learned. You can use Reiki along with a lot of other techniques. And so that's something that is really neat about Reiki energy is that it does healing and it does empowering, revealing as well in all of these different techniques. So, ancestral history and past lives, they can be different and they can be intertwined. So that's the interesting thing about these topics is that we're going to talk about each one. So when we're talking about ancestral history is obviously like what we have been passed down, right? We live in human bodies and we have genetic memory, we have genetic code within us. And so that is what we're talking about with ancestral history, that we might have body memory from our ancestors. We might have certain genes that have been passed down that affect our life today. We might have the different coding within our DNA that we have been passed down. There's a lot that's really interesting about the more that we know about ancestral history. Um, we have, generational things as well. We have generational trauma, we have generational strengths, we have generational wounds, we have generational gifts. So that's the thing about this work and where this work has been evolving into, not just in Reiki, but Reiki does this part of it naturally, but in other modalities too. Even in just the nomenclature, you're seeing this shift in how we are also viewing some of these topics about that our ancestors gave us more than wounds. They also gave us generational strengths. And that is one thing that we really talk about is in that shift of paradigm of like, what are we looking at? What are we now? We have these aspects of us that we do have to shift, um, you know, cycles that can come through the generations. Sometimes we are in this lifetime to be a cycle breaker. Maybe there is a cycle of um, aspects of our family that have been passed down that are not so pretty. And so maybe we are shifting that in this lifetime. We are lineage changers, where this is the lifetime that my lineage changes. And we are not passing on dynamics that might have been true for many generations. But we also have the strengths because our lineage has also moved through those things and has gotten us to where we are today. We have strengths that has overcome adversity. We have strengths and gifts that we might that might be contained within the generational aspects, within the DNA, within all of those things. And going back to what I was saying before, and kind of went in a different direction, is that the more we know about our DNA, the more that we know about our genetics, the more we are learning about our epigenetics, right? That we can switch genes on and off even in within one lifetime. That external factors can change our genetics within one lifetime. So external factors such as diet, right? We know that's where so much of that research is. That or exercise. That's where a lot of the research is that we can have the epigenetics. But we also can have spiritual epigenetics where maybe we are even waking back up things that have been turned off within our genetics for a few generations. So things like that can happen as well. So we have human bodies, and with that comes that reality of the scientific aspects of ourselves that are real in this material world, such as our DNA. Our souls also have a soul's memory. We might have come into this lifetime with many past lifetimes on this planet. Um, our souls have histories. Sometimes we come into this lifetime where we haven't had a lot of lifetimes on this planet and we don't have a lot of memory on this planet. So we can have our soul's history that might match up with our ancestral history, but we also have seen where our memory has not actually, like our soul's memory has not actually matched up with our ancestral history. So that's the interesting thing about these two subjects is that they can align, but then also we have seen them many times where they have differed. So for example of that, um, Colleen talks about how in her past life memory, it also very much aligns with her ancestral memory. So her genetics come from Ireland, England we're very Irish and English and within our genetic lines. And they have been there for, you know, like millennia. And she has that memory back to Celtic times, Celtic traditions, things like that. And when she went to Ireland and explored Celtic traditions, fairy doctoring, Celtic shamanism, there was a lot that was very familiar to her. My maternal grandmother had a past life memory where she went to this one particular castle, and when she was in England, and she knew of like passageways and things like that that were hidden to the public. Like she had a past life memory come through where she lived in that castle, knew that castle, and that was a past life memory, but also our genetics would very much match up with that. So we have that part of that where those things align. But we can also have the times when our past lives and our ancestral history don't necessarily align. So we may have come into this lifetime, into this familial line from a different culture here on the planet. Maybe we have skipped lifetimes here on the planet and have ancient memory, but we don't necessarily have like whatever that was in between those lifetimes. And so being born into this genetic body can feel like there's a misalignment there. We have people that can come into um this these genetics, and they might be from other realms. So people who are star seeds, I think, is probably the most common, commonly known part of that, where they come in from other, cosmic realms. So you'll hear the words Pleiadians, Arcturians, things like that, where they're coming in from other star systems, and they come in to this body. And maybe this is even the first lifetime that they've experienced on the planet. We've talked about people that come in from the angelic realms, and same thing. This is the first lifetime, or maybe, maybe they've had a couple of lifetimes on this planet. Um, and so these bodies feel unfamiliar. They may not have like a super strong connection to their family lineage. Um, so they can come in even as different species. We've seen people that have been different species here in their soul's history. Coming into human bodies feels very unfamiliar. And though that, you can, when you're in a session and the Reiki reveals something like that. I just had a session recently that this happened. And they're like, oh, that makes so much sense as to why I don't necessarily feel super connected to either my ancestral lineage. Like I don't feel like, oh, like how Colleen feels so connected into her Irish English heritage. I don't feel that connection to that lineage. People that, and then you can have, that they feel like we have these bodies that have the DNA. And so that's a reality of being born here. That's a reality of who we are. And so that can feel like there's that disjointed aspect. My memory doesn't match up with my body's memory. And Reiki is one of those things that actually can really help, or just even the knowledge of that, the knowledge that I am not necessarily, my soul's history doesn't necessarily have that memory. And so therefore there is this mismatch. And just even knowing that can be very helpful. There is actually a feeling of being settled within that knowledge. And star seeds can very much attest to that. Finding out that they're a star seed, there's like this whole almost like lifetime of knowing that. And when they have that realization of like, oh, okay, so I'm a star seed, that is why I have felt so different, or maybe not at home in my body my whole life. This is why I don't necessarily like, either I fit in with being human, or I don't fit in with my family, or I have no genetic connection to my ancestral line. So all of those things can be true when we're talking about ancestral history and or past life history, that these our souls have a memory and our bodies have a memory. And it can be nice when we feel so much connection around that. And it can be hard when we don't necessarily feel a connection around that. Um, and I will say too, when there is a person that might have been a part of another culture for a lot of lifetimes and then has been born into a different culture and even may even be very drawn back to the land that they have been in past lives. You can see that of like, why did I feel so compelled to move here? Why do I feel such a connection to this land as opposed to the land that comes through my lineage? And a lot of times you'll see when you're in on doing that deep soul work, you'll see, oh, this is a part of that is because this might be your first time in this lineage. It might be maybe only one or two times in this lineage. Like I said, I've seen this in where people have even been different species. I had this happen not too long ago where somebody had a memory of, it was a short lifetime obviously, but somebody had a memory of being a bird in a lifetime, and the seeing that in the session, and I say see proverbial because I don't actually see it, but the knowing of that in a lifetime made so much sense to her in this lifetime that she's actually, even wrote about the experience of being a bird. And not everybody that has written those kinds of experiences does have that. But it was like, oh, this is why I feel so connected to that. You see people in spirituality that have memory of ancient Egypt, memory of being Atlantean, those kinds of ancient cultures as well. That would be within the soul's memory. And with ancient Egypt, maybe there is a lineage that has been passed down. Maybe there's a part of that genetic code that has been passed down, obviously, within the time span, and that part of the world being the cradle of civilization, things like that. Those kinds of things are hard to exactly know all the time. Um, but you see people that have that soul's memory within those ancient cultures, within those ancient civilizations that they bring into this lifetime. So those are kind of where they differ as far as what ancestral history is, what past lives can be. There can be a difference or a disconnect between them, and then there can be that intersectionality between them, where they might be the same also. So both things exist, and the possibilities can be endless with it. That's the really fascinating part of it. Um, you know, how that and exploring that for yourself or practitioners that do this work, exploring that can bring a lot of peace and it can bring a lot of comfort, because you have this inner knowing almost since childhood. This maybe even this very subconscious remembering, maybe it's a very blatant remembering, like you experience it um, a lot with it, where you experience either that disconnect or that very strong memory around it. What also can be fascinating too are the things that can be passed down through a lineage that are your gifts and talents. Because as I said earlier, we do focus a lot on the wounds, right? We in this work we see that a lot. How do I heal past lives? How do I heal um you know, uh, genetic aspects or generational aspects. And but you can also see the gifts that could be passed down through things. So, for example, something like this might be um, genetic gift or genetic memory of being able to see through the veils. Like you'll see that passed through, for example, the maternal lines. Um, you heard stories of your grandmother who might have been easily able to connect into spirits or see spirits or have these gifts. Or maybe there were gifts of being a healer in past lives, such as knowing an innate knowing in how to use herbs, an innate knowing in how to use nature for healing, the gifts that nature brings through healing. And somewhere along the line, maybe it wasn't safe to be that kind of healer, and so the gifts were suppressed or they were hidden and then they weren't passed down. But so many people talk about, like, oh, yeah, there was whisperings of this with my grandmother or my great grandmother that had these gifts. But, I was never taught about them, but I have them. I have memory of a child of me having these gifts, or interest in them, or subtle knowings with them, or maybe even really strong knowings. And I was taught to either ignore or hide or suppress them. We're starting now to be in a time frame where we're in that ability to be able to be in a remembering of those kinds of things. If our children are born with them, we are able to be in a time frame where we can try to help them in their remembering of that for as long as possible, or maybe they keep them for their entire lives. They have maybe the gifts of being able to see through the veil, the gifts of being able to have the memory of the plants or that connection to earth medicine, um, those kinds of things. We know in other cultures that these are more common teachings, that they might not have been suppressed or hidden or anything like that, that they are um, more um, like reveled in, that they are honored, that is a part of who they are within their families. It's a part of what their family is gifted with, things like that. But in this culture, where we have come from is that, yes, we have been in a level of hiding them, suppressing them, because of, frankly, of safety, right? That it was maybe not safe to be able to have them. Um, and so that is a part um, of where we are right now with it. So I think that that is a part of what Reiki is doing, but also what is switching within our like spiritual groups, because there's a lot of ways to do this work. You might have heard of past life regression. You might have heard of constellation work, like family constellation work. You might have heard of other tools and techniques that do this work. So there's not just one way to do this work. There's a lot of ways to do this work. And for a long time, which isn't a bad thing, it was as these techniques, as these tools and techniques were being remembered or were being learned by these spiritual communities. For a long time, we were just going in and healing the lifetimes or the ancestral history where those big wounds have happened. We have a lot of things to heal within that, right? Like there's been eons or millennia of war and brutality. Um, there has been a millennial or yeah, millennia of colonialism. There's been these things that colonization. There's been these things that need to heal within our present life, within our present systems, and genetic memory, maybe past life memory that is needing to be released, needing to be healed so that we can um, recognize that, so that we can also let that go from what we are carrying today. And so that's really important. However, if we are only looking at that, then we are only focusing on the tragedies, the atrocities, the things that are, pretty brutal within our human history. And when we're only looking at that, we are only like, going into that energy with with ourselves. So if I am only looking for red cars, then I'm going to see a lot of red cars, right? Isn't that the kind of saying with that? However, our past lives, our soul's history, our even our genetics, our ancestral memory, even if we don't belong into our own ancestry, it has more than just wounds. It also gave us gifts. So what about those lifetimes? What about the lifetimes? And I'm not just talking about gifts and talents, like even though I said earlier, the gifts and talents of being able to see through the veils or to be able to have that memory of nature healing, like being an herbalist or things like that. I'm talking also about our um our strengths, our perseverance, our ability to have forgiveness. That maybe we are a person that is able to forgive and see both sides and understand and have compassion more than the average person. So there's a lot of gifts with all of these that we have also been a that our ancestry, our past lives have also had. It's our past lives too, if we are from other systems or we are from ancient times or maybe different cultures or maybe things like the angelic realms or maybe even a different species, where are the gifts that we have memory within that we have also brought into this lifetime? If we are looking at that, is that something that we can then apply into our life? That is a different framing of like who we are, where we came from, and how can we pass that down? How can we go into that aspect of, who I believe is or what I believe is the root of humanity in general, of everyday people, which is rooted in love. Um, and can we go into that aspect and create our own lives from that viewpoint of I have the strength of my ancestors, or I have the ancient wisdom of this past life, or I have this ability to view people through the lens of compassion because in my past life I have been through things that have given me this gift of compassion more than the average person. Or even though it can be challenging in this lifetime to be in a human body, even though I'm a star seed, I am able to um, bring a different frequency into humanity, which maybe we need. I'm able to see, and I don't mean psychic, although that too, I'm able to go into the future of possibilities. So there is a variety of things that can be our gifts and talents, that can be the things that we have memory around, that are also important for not just ourselves, but that ripple effect of this planet, right? Hoping that by looking at this work or helping people to understand this work, or I'm sorry, understand themselves and understand that the reason that they might feel the way that they might feel, or maybe that disconnection of their ancestry versus their soul's memory, or in the opposite, that deep connection to their ancestry and the memory that they have had back to the times when people were living off the land and they were, fully in the memory of that land. And many, a lot of people can attest to that because when they visit maybe where they were from, if their ancestry is from a different place, if they visit where they're from, they have that memory of the land, or maybe they even see a movie and they have this strong memory or this strong connection. So those things that moving into both of that, how much that can help settle us in who we are, how much that can settle us in the connection or the disconnection really does actually help that ripple effect within our own lives, also within which then, affects the lives around us, affects the lives around them, and becomes this ripple effect of healing. I can see this just by understanding the people around me, even if they don't do the work that, I personally do or I do as a practitioner, and understanding these things. Because I've seen the the type of person that, let's say, like, my husband is, where, very future oriented, very forward thinking. Because I've seen others like that, it helps me to understand him more. Because I see his chart, it helps me to understand him more. And the same is true with my daughter. And I don't go and do sessions with them without their permission or anything like that, because to me, even though it's my family that's closest to me, I still stay within my ethics around that. I would always ask for express permission around those things. But because I have understood people or understand myself in these ways, then it helps me to understand the people around me more, which helps me feel settled, which helps them feel settled within that. And that understanding of the either the connection or the disconnection within, the ancestral history or the past life history. Now, when we're talking about Reiki, one of the things that Reiki does just on its own, like not exploring this work, Reiki does this work naturally. And so, if you're a Reiki practitioner wondering, like, do I have to do all of this to do the healing, or know all of this to do the healing? No, Reiki is doing this work on its own. One of the things that I love about Reiki energy in general is that Reiki energy naturally is letting go of things, but also bringing in things. And it's a part of why we do this work in this way. What are you letting go of? What are you bringing in? We have that as a part of the journey every single time, even if it might not be in those words that are exactly that, because Reiki is a stress reduction technique. It's more than just that. It's letting go of stress. It's bringing in wellness and comfort and life force and vitality. Something that just is inherent in what it does. So if you think about that and extrapolating that to other versions of Reiki energy and other versions of doing this work, it's letting go of the wounds. And letting go of the wounds is vitally important. There's a lot of wounding in humanity. We live in a very dual place. There's wounding now, right? We live in a very dual plane. And so it is important to let go of that because it might be affecting us in this lifetime. We might have ancestral history. Well, we know that we have ancestral history, and I don't need to go into the brutality of ancestral history, but we have that. And how is that bringing us down today? How is that affecting our lives today? How has that affected our genetics, our generational things? And how can we let go of what might be tying us to that? What might be holding us back in this lifetime might be a block. And there isn't necessarily like what we can think of as a conscious block, but it has to do with something that has happened within our lineage that is in our DNA. How do we let that go? And then how do we empower the strengths that those same ancestors gave to us, the gifts that those same ancestors gave to us, the things that, even if we have generational trauma per se, the strengths that that has also brought to us, or the strength that maybe we are the cycle changers, maybe we're the lineage changers. Those things are important. And you see that in this lifetime all the time. And in this work, I see that. We see that all the time. You've come into this lifetime to be a lineage changer, to be a cycle breaker, and your children or descendants, because you don't have to have biological children, will have a different experience in this lifetime than you had as um, that. And you're seeing people using Reiki energy to do this work, using these spiritual tools to do this work, because it's what helps support them in being able to do that, because that isn't easy work. That's hard, very hard work. And so Reiki energy also within our past lives is letting go of the things that have been challenging. Let's say I used this on social the other day, so I know it's a little redundant, but what about that vow of silence that you made in a past life? We see that, and it's affecting our voice in this lifetime. It's affecting us speaking up. It's affecting us saying our truth. It's affecting us having fear around saying our truth, or maybe we don't have fear. Maybe it's just a block we're unaware of, and letting go of that. But instead, maybe even from the same lifetime, the gift that somebody might learn in a vow of silence, let's say you were a monk or something like that in a past lifetime. Well, the gift in that lifetime is the fact that you are able to go into a deep dive of spiritual truths that, maybe just your regular ordinary citizen didn't have that. And so that's the gift. And so you're looking at that. But then there could be other lifetimes where you didn't have a vow of silence every single time, right? You have other gifts from other lifetimes. And so that's also what Reiki is bringing forth. And it's also healing the things in the light. So that's the other thing. It's letting them go into the light where they're to be listened to and heard and healed, but they also don't belong to you anymore. They don't have any right to be sovereign over you. They don't have any right to have power over you. Um, all of those kinds of things, because here in this lifetime, Reiki is helping us all to, um, live our lives in the most empowered way. So I think I'm looking at the time, and we want to have time to do the journey, because really that's more important than any words that I could speak, is allowing Reiki to show us our own truth, show us our own path, show us our own awareness and understanding around it all, or any of the tools that you might use to do this work. Could continue to talk about this particular subject. And we do in our next up Reiki, we have multiple modules exploring ancestral history, past lives, things like that. We also did a webinar last year. So there's like a 2-hour webinar last year that we did. It's on our YouTube, and it's going into this subject as well. So you could go check that out also. All right, go ahead, Danny. I saw you unmute.
Yeah, I just wanted to add when you were talking about cycle breakers. First of all, I just want to remind all of us here that are Reiki practitioners that getting sessions ourselves is really beneficial. And I do it. And I had one last week. And I had a session, and I thought I was going to be breaking a cycle of my ancestors. I thought that I was heading down a path that seemed very familiar. And I have a daughter, and I didn't want that, her to follow the same path. And so I had a session, and what came out of it was how empowered my lineage is, how amazing my mom and grandmother and great grandmother and what they did in their time. And instead of me looking at it like, ugh, am I going to follow that path? It was like, oh my gosh, it was amazing and very empowering. And going from, fear or negativity to, I can't wait to see what happens. And so sometimes we can be pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, it's so true. Thanks, Danny. All right, let's go ahead and go into the journey. And Danny's going to be leading that today.